Can I Kiss You? When the millionaire husband turned a contract into love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was a Tuesday morning in New York City, the kind of morning when the skyscrapers pierced the low clouds like sharp blades of glass. She stood outside the courthouse, her thrift store heels wobbling slightly on the marble steps, her hands clutching a plain brown envelope. Inside were hospital bills, months overdue, and taped to the last page was a single eviction notice. But what drew the most attention that morning was not her trembling figure. It was the fact that she was wearing a secondhand wedding dress creased, slightly yellowed, clearly bought for pennies at a pawn shop, and she was wearing it in public at 9 o'clock in the morning. Some people walking by stopped, snapped photos, and whispered. Why was a girl in a wedding dress alone outside a courthouse, looking as if she were about to cry? Minutes later, a black limousine rolled up. Out stepped a man who looked like he had stepped out of the front page of Forbes magazine. His suit was hand-tailored, his watch alone cost more than her entire neighborhood, and yet his face was carved from ice. He glanced at her dress and, without a word, handed his driver a folder, as if the entire world were just another transaction. He said, "You are late." His voice was smooth, sharp, and without warmth. She lifted her chin. I was not aware this was a timed audition. He narrowed his eyes. He was Alexander Ward, a 32-year-old self-made millionaire, heir to a sprawling real estate empire. To him, everything had a price, even marriage, especially marriage. In the next 10 minutes, their lives collided in a way that would ignite whispers across the city. He offered her a contract, 1 year of marriage, public appearances as his wife, and in exchange, enough money to erase every debt she carried. The only conditions? No love, no intimacy, no expectations beyond the script, he wrote. And yet, the image of her in that wedding dress, wrong place, wrong time, like a runaway bride without a groom, was about to change everything. Because when Alexander Ward signed that contract, he believed he was buying silence and convenience. What he did not expect was the one question that would echo back at him months later, shattering every boundary he built. Can I kiss you? But before we get there, let us start from the beginning, this deal born in cold calculation, and the woman who dared to look him in the eye while the entire world was watching. The limousine door slammed shut, echoing against the courthouse walls like a gavel. Alexander Ward walked beside her, his stride long and commanding, as if the entire sidewalk belonged to him. People turned their heads, not because of her second-hand gown, but because of the aura he carried. It was money. It was power. It was the kind of confidence only the wealthy could afford. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. He handed her a pen, silver and sleek, engraved with his initials. She stared at it as if it were a weapon. This is your choice, Alexander said, his voice low but firm. You can walk away, or you can sign and change your life. Her fingers trembled as she touched the pen. Change my life. Into what? A lie? For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone before she could name it. He leaned closer. A lie that pays your bills. A lie that saves your family. Do not confuse survival with shame. Those words cut deeper than he knew. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, of the eviction notice crumpled in her purse, of the little brother who still believed she was strong enough to protect him. Survival, yes, but at what cost? Her signature landed on the page with finality. It was done. She was now Mrs. Alexander Ward, at least on paper. When they stepped back onto the marble steps, reporters were already waiting. Cameras flashed. Microphones reached out like hungry mouths. Mr. Ward, who is your bride? Is this a real marriage or a publicity stunt? Alexander did not hesitate. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer than she expected. His touch was steady, rehearsed, but to the world, it looked like devotion. He leaned into the cameras and declared, "This is my wife." The word burned in her ears. Wife, a word she had dreamed of hearing one day, but not like this. not as part of a transaction. As they slid back into the limousine, the door shutting out the chaos of reporters, she exhaled shakily. "You are very good at lying." His jaw tightened. "It is not lying. It is business." The car sped through Manhattan, past billboards and glittering towers. For the first time, she allowed herself to really look at him, the sharp line of his jaw, the controlled movements, the way his eyes never softened. He was not just a man, he was a fortress. But fortresses, she reminded herself, were built to hide something inside. That night, in the sprawling penthouse that now bore her name, she found herself in a world carved from marble and glass. Chandeliers glittered above her, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city skyline like a living painting. She had never seen such wealth, and yet she had never felt so alone. Alexander handed her a thick document, pages of rules, where she could go, what she could say in public, how she should dress, how often they would appear together. Every detail was measured, controlled, and at the very bottom, one line stood out, a clause colder than the rest. No physical intimacy without consent, and no kisses under any circumstance. She stared at it, her lips parting in disbelief. No kisses? His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and unyielding. Exactly. Kisses complicate things. They make people believe in feelings that are not there. The silence stretched between them. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but her chest ached instead. Because for her, a kiss had never been just a gesture. It had always meant something real. She folded the document, her hands trembling, and for the first time she wondered if this contract was not just going to save her life, but destroy her heart. The following week came faster than she could prepare for. Alexander had arranged a formal charity gala at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels. The event was not just about philanthropy, it was about appearances. Every journalist, investor, and socialite in New York would be watching. And now, she would be on his arm. The penthouse staff moved like clockwork, dressing her in a gown that shimmered under the chandelier's light. The fabric was smooth against her skin, far removed from the secondhand clothes she usually wore. When she looked in the mirror, she almost did not recognize the woman staring back at her. Alexander appeared in the doorway, his tuxedo immaculate, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, not lingering long enough to suggest desire, but long enough to make her pulse quicken. "You look acceptable," he said at last. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "That is the highest compliment I will ever get from you, is it not?" His brow arched slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he offered his arm, and she slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. The warmth of his body seeped through the fabric, unfamiliar yet grounding. At the gala, the air was thick with perfume, champagne, and whispered gossip. Crystal chandeliers glowed like constellations above a sea of tuxedos and glittering dresses. As they entered, cameras flashed relentlessly. "Mr. Ward, smile this way." "Mrs. Ward, over here." The title, Mrs. Ward, still felt foreign, heavy, like a costume she was not sure she could wear. They paused for photos, standing shoulder to shoulder. A photographer shouted, "Come on, give us a kiss." The crowd laughed, expecting compliance. Alexander's jaw tightened. He leaned close to her ear, his breath grazing her skin. "Do not worry. I told you, that will never happen." To the cameras, he offered only a practiced smile, pulling her closer as if they were deeply in love. The audience clapped, fooled by the performance. But she felt the hollowness of his grip, the calculated distance behind his touch. As the evening unfolded, she endured polite conversations with women who looked her up and down with thinly veiled contempt. "So, where did you two meet?" one of them asked, her diamond necklace catching the light. Before she could stumble over a reply, Alexander spoke smoothly. "At a gallery opening. She was standing in front of a painting I was about to buy." The lie was seamless, convincing enough to draw gasps of admiration. She forced a smile, but inside, her heart twisted. To him, she was nothing more than another line in a script. Later, during the dinner course, a wealthy businessman raised his glass and joked, "Alexander, are you sure she is real? We have yet to see proof." The table erupted in laughter. Her face burned. She wanted to disappear beneath the linen tablecloth. But Alexander remained calm, sipping his wine. Then, With deliberate slowness, he set down his glass, stood, and placed his hand firmly on her shoulder. "This woman," he said, his voice carrying over the laughter, "is my wife, and she deserves the same respect you would give me." The room fell silent. The businessman chuckled nervously and muttered an apology. Her chest tightened at his words, not because they were tender, but because they sounded so final, so absolute. For a fleeting moment, she almost believed him. On the ride home, the city lights blurred past the limousine windows. She sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Alexander leaned back, eyes closed, as if nothing unusual had happened. Finally, she whispered, "You defended me tonight." His eyes opened, cold and steady. "I defended my reputation. Do not confuse the two." The words stung, but what hurt more was the flicker she had seen earlier at the dinner table, the hint that, just maybe, there was more truth in his defense than he would ever admit. And in that fragile space between what was real and what was performance, she began to feel something dangerous, the spark of wanting to believe. Days turned into weeks, and the arrangement began to feel less like a marriage and more like a carefully staged play. Every outing, every public appearance was a performance with lines and cues only Alexander controlled. She played her part because she had to, but behind closed doors, the curtain always fell. Inside the penthouse, silence filled the marble halls. They often moved around each other like strangers, bound by invisible walls. She found herself gravitating toward the small library tucked away in a corner of the home. Unlike the rest of the penthouse, it felt warm, filled with the scent of leather and paper. There, she would sketch quietly, trying to reclaim a piece of the life that once belonged to her. One evening, she was bent over her sketchbook when Alexander appeared unexpectedly in the doorway. His tie was undone, his expression sharper than usual. He watched her draw without speaking, the lines of her pencil forming a face she quickly tried to hide. "Who is that?" he asked, stepping closer. Her hand froze. No one, just a sketch. But his gaze lingered on the page, recognizing something she had hoped he would not. The face bore his features, cold eyes, strong jaw, but softened with a warmth she had never seen in reality. "You are wasting your time," he said finally, though his voice carried less bite than usual. "I am not that man." She closed the book gently. "Maybe not yet." For a moment, the air thickened, as though the walls of the penthouse held their breath. But then he turned and left, shutting the door with a finality that crushed the fragile moment. The next week, they were invited to another event, this time a private dinner with his family. The Ward estate loomed like a fortress, sprawling across acres of manicured gardens. His mother's eyes were sharp, her words sharper. "So, you are the one Alexander chose to marry," she said, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Tell me, dear, what exactly do you contribute to this family?" The question hung like a knife over the table. She opened her mouth, but Alexander spoke first. "She contributes loyalty, something money cannot buy." His mother's expression tightened, but she said no more. Still, the sting of judgment lingered. Later that evening, while walking back to the limousine, she whispered, "You did not have to say that." He glanced down at her, his eyes unreadable. "Yes, I did." "Oh." Back in the penthouse, rain lashed against the windows. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her. She could not deny the way her chest tightened when he defended her, even if he would never admit why. That night, as thunder rattled the glass, the power went out. Darkness consumed the apartment, and for the first time, Alexander seemed unsettled. She lit a candle, its glow softening the edges of his sharp features. "Do storms bother you?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then replied, "No, but silence does." The confession startled her. For a brief moment, she saw him not as the untouchable millionaire, but as a man carrying shadows. When lightning split the sky, she flinched instinctively. Without thinking, he placed his coat over her shoulders, his hand brushing her arm. The touch lingered longer than necessary. They stood there, two people bound by a contract, illuminated by a single flame. The distance between them, shrinking in ways neither had planned. For the first time, she realized that beneath the rules and the clauses, something else was forming, something real. But in the quiet after the storm, she also realized something else, if she was not careful, This arrangement meant to save her could end up costing her everything. The calm after the storm did not last. With every public appearance, whispers grew louder, questions sharper. The tabloids thrived on scandal, and their sudden marriage was a feast. Headlines splashed across newsstands: Ward's mystery bride, gold digger, or true love. Photographers hounded her on the streets, waiting for a stumble, a crack in the performance. Inside the penthouse, Alexander's phone rang constantly. His business associates demanded answers. His board of directors questioned his judgment. Even his own family pushed him to annul the marriage before it could tarnish their name further. One afternoon, while she arranged flowers in the living room to bring some life into the cold penthouse, a voice startled her. "Enjoying your stay in the castle, Cinderella?" She turned sharply. A woman stood in the doorway, elegant, perfectly groomed, with eyes that held both amusement and disdain. Alexander entered moments later, his expression tightening. "This is Victoria," he said flatly. "We were involved." Victoria's laugh was sharp. "Involved? That is an understatement, darling. We were supposed to be engaged." Her stomach dropped. The name was familiar from the gossip columns, the woman many had expected to become Mrs. Ward. Now, standing in front of her, Victoria looked like everything she was not: polished, powerful, and belonging to his world. Victoria circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "So this is the wife? How convenient. Let me guess you signed a contract?" Alexander always did like keeping things under control. Heat flushed her cheeks, but she refused to look away. "I am not here to explain myself to you," Victoria smirked. "You will not have to. The press will do that for you." With that, she swept out of the room, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken truths. Later that night, she confronted Alexander. "Is it true? Was she supposed to be your fiancé?" He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the city lights. "My family wanted it. It was convenient. But convenience is not the same as choice." Her voice trembled. "And what am I, Alexander? Am I choice or convenience?" His silence cut deeper than any answer. Days later, the first wave hit. A tabloid published photos of her entering the courthouse in that secondhand wedding dress. Alongside the eviction notice, details someone had leaked. The headline screamed, "Ward bride exposed. Debt ridden. Nobody snags. Millionaire." The humiliation was unbearable. Strangers on the internet dissected her life, mocking her background, her family, her poverty. She shut herself in the library, unable to face the cameras, the whispers, the judgment. Alexander stormed in, slamming the paper onto the desk. "Who told them?" His voice was sharp, controlled rage beneath the surface. She looked up at him, tears burning her eyes. Does it matter? They were always going to find out. For the first time, his anger faltered. He saw the weight of shame on her shoulders, the way she tried to hide behind strength. Slowly, he lowered his voice. "You do not deserve this." She shook her head. "But it is what I signed up for, is it not? A contract. A performance. Ali." The words hung between them, sharper than any storm. That night, lying awake in separate rooms, both of them replayed the same questions. She wondered if she had sold her soul for survival. He wondered if, somewhere along the way, this arrangement had stopped being about convenience. And outside, the city roared with gossip, hungry for their downfall. What neither of them knew was that the worst was yet to come. Because sometimes, secrets did not just ruin reputations, they ruined hearts. The scandal refused to fade. Every morning, a new headline screamed her name, twisting the story into something uglier. At first, she thought she could endure it, that the whispers would die down. But the more she tried to stay silent, the louder the world seemed to shout. One evening, after another long day of avoiding the press, she stepped into the penthouse library and found Alexander already there. He was sitting in the dark, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table, the city lights spilling across his face. "You cannot keep hiding from this," she said quietly, her voice trembling with exhaustion. His gaze shifted to her, sharp but tired. "And what do you suggest I do? Announce to the world that our marriage is a lie? Watch them tear you apart even more?" Her chest tightened. "They already are. Every article, every photo. Alexander, I cannot breathe in this cage you built." "No?" His jaw clenched, but his silence was louder than any defense. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I will fix this," he said. She spun back to him, her eyes blazing. "No, you will control it. That is what you do. That is all you ever do." The words struck him harder than she realized. For once, the man who had an answer for everything had none. Days later, they traveled together to a coastal estate for a business retreat. Alexander insisted she attend, knowing the press would follow. He wanted to prove the image of a united front. She wanted to disappear. The estate overlooked the ocean, waves crashing against the cliffs below. At the evening banquet, she sat beside him, her smile practiced, her heart numb. Laughter and champagne filled the air, but she could not taste any of it. Then, during a toast, a guest raised his glass and shouted, "A kiss for the happy couple." The room erupted in cheers. Dozens of eyes turned toward them. Alexander stiffened beside her, his entire body rigid. The contract's words echoed in her mind. "No kisses under any circumstance." She forced a smile, shaking her head. "Not tonight." The crowd groaned playfully, but the moment passed. Still, her pulse raced. She could feel Alexander's stare, heavy and unreadable, as though the request had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Later that night, as the waves thundered below the cliffs, she slipped outside for air. The moonlight washed over her face as she leaned against the railing, clutching the fabric of her dress. She felt the weight of the contract like chains around her wrists. She did not hear him approach until he was beside her. Alexander stood silently, his hands gripping the railing, his eyes fixed on the horizon. For once, there was no mask, no armor. Only a man haunted by something he could not name. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked softly. His voice was low, rougher than usual. "Because I thought it would keep me safe. From lies, from betrayal, from everything that has always come with love." Her breath caught. "So, you built a contract to protect yourself from feeling." He turned to her, his expression raw in the moonlight. "And yet here I am, standing next to you, breaking every rule I made." The air between them tightened, electric, charged with everything unspoken. His hand brushed hers on the railing. A fleeting touch that sent her heart racing. For the first time since their arrangement began, the fortress around Alexander Ward cracked. And in that crack, she saw not the millionaire who had bought her name, but the man who might lose himself if he ever dared to love. But the question lingered, sharp as the salt air. Was this the beginning of something real, or the start of their undoing? The night at the coastal estate did not end with the waves. It ended with silence, two people standing side by side, both shaken by what almost happened, but neither daring to admit it aloud. By morning, Alexander was back to his usual self, his walls rebuilt, his expression as cold as marble. They returned to New York, but something had shifted. She felt it in the way he watched her when he thought she was not looking. She felt it in the way her own heart betrayed her, pounding when his hand brushed against hers, even by accident. Weeks passed, and then came another charity event, one even larger than before. The ballroom was filled with chandeliers, champagne, and the city's most powerful eyes. She wore a gown the color of midnight, the satin hugging her figure as though it belonged to someone braver than her. The evening played out as expected: smiles, small talk, endless questions about their marriage. But then, during a lull in the music, Alexander pulled her aside. His grip on her arm was firm, almost urgent. "Follow me," he said. He led her through the gilded corridors until they reached a quieter balcony overlooking the city lights. The cool night air wrapped around them, the hum of the party muffled behind closed doors. She frowned. "What is this about?" For a moment, Alexander did not answer. He stood there, staring at her, as though waging war with himself. His jaw tightened, his breath uneven. Then, finally, he spoke. "All this time, I thought rules could protect me, that if I drew the line, no one could cross it. But you," he exhaled sharply, "you keep crossing it without even trying." Her chest tightened. "Alexander." He stepped closer, the distance between them collapsing. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Can I kiss you?" The words stole her breath. It was not cold, it was not commanding, it was a plea. She froze, caught between fear and longing. Every warning screamed at her this was dangerous. This was not part of the contract. This was not supposed to happen. And yet her heart thundered, louder than reason. Her lips parted, But before she could answer, the balcony doors burst open. Reporters, tipped off by someone inside, had swarmed the corridor. Cameras flashed, questions flew. Are you two in love? Is this real or just another stunt? Alexander's body stiffened. For a moment, she thought he would retreat, fall back into his fortress. But then, before the world, he turned to her. And he kissed her. The crowd gasped. The cameras exploded in light. But in that instant, none of it mattered. The kiss was not calculated, not rehearsed. It was raw, desperate, real. When he finally pulled back, his voice was steady, but his eyes burned with something he could no longer hide. That was not part of the contract. Her pulse raced, her entire world spinning. For the first time, she saw him not as Alexander Ward, the millionaire, but as Alexander, the man who had just broken his own rules for her. But as the cameras continued to flash, she realized the danger had only just begun. Because a kiss like that did not just ignite whispers, it ignited war. The balcony kiss became the headline of the week. Every newspaper, every gossip column, every television host replayed the moment on loop. The contract couple in love splashed across covers, while pundits debated whether it was real or another stunt. Inside the penthouse, the air was heavy with the fallout. Alexander stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her phone buzzing non-stop with messages she refused to read. Finally, she broke the silence. Why did you do it? He turned, his gaze piercing. Because I wanted to. Oh. Her heart raced at the blunt honesty, but fear followed close behind. Alexander, do you realize what this means? They will tear us apart. Your family, the press, everyone who wants to see us fail. Let them, he interrupted sharply. He crossed the room in long strides, stopping in front of her. I am done pretending. At first, this marriage was about convenience, about control. But now, it is about you. Her breath caught. Do not say things you cannot mean. Oh. He lowered himself to her level, his voice steady, deliberate. I mean every word. You are not my contract. You are not my shield. You are the woman I love. Tears stung her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of hearing the words she had never expected. The following evening, the two of them faced Alexander's board of directors. Stern faces stared across the polished oak table, demanding answers. One man said coldly, "You have jeopardized the Ward name. This spectacle must end." Oh. Alexander rose to his full height, his presence commanding. Yes, it began as a contract. But now, it is real. And if you want me to choose between the company and my wife, then understand this, I will choose her. Gasps echoed around the room. The board members exchanged frantic glances, but his voice cut through their murmurs like steel. I built this empire, not because of your approval, but because of who I am. And who I am now is a man who will not apologize for loving his wife. She watched him, her chest tightening with pride and fear, all at once. He had exposed everything, dismantling the very fortress he had spent years building. When they walked out of that room, the city outside still burned with questions, but she knew one thing had changed forever. Alexander Ward had chosen her, publicly, defiantly. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was stronger than any contract. The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines and speculation. The media storm raged on, but inside the penthouse, something had shifted. For the first time, silence between them did not feel empty. It felt alive, filled with something unspoken but undeniable. One evening, she found Alexander in the study, the infamous contract spread out on the desk. The same papers that had once chained her now lay open, fragile under the weight of everything they had endured. He looked up as she entered. His eyes were steady, but softer than she had ever seen them. This ends tonight. Before she could ask, he picked up the contract, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall like snow to the floor. The sound of ripping paper was louder than thunder, echoing through the marble halls like a declaration of war against his old self. She covered her mouth, her heart racing. Alexander. He stepped closer, holding a small velvet box in his hand. That contract was never supposed to define us, but I am done hiding, done pretending this is just business. He opened the box to reveal a simple yet breathtaking diamond ring. Kneeling before her, Alexander's voice was steady but raw. "I asked you once to sign your name on a contract. Now I am asking you to choose me freely. No clauses, no conditions, just us. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling for the first time since she had known him. When he rose, he pulled her into his arms, and in front of no cameras, no board members, no contracts, he kissed her again, this time not as proof, not as rebellion, but as a promise. Months later, the world would watch their wedding, a ceremony no longer built on paper but on love. Critics still whispered, doubters still doubted, but none of it mattered. Because when she walked down the aisle, and Alexander waited with eyes filled not with pride but with devotion, the truth was undeniable. The girl once mocked for her secondhand wedding dress had become the wife of a millionaire, not through a contract, but through a love that defied every rule. And as they sealed their vows with a kiss, she knew with absolute certainty this was no longer the end of an agreement. It was the beginning of forever,